All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining, tackling the challenge of producing deeply affordable housing and celebrating Affordable Housing Month with us. My name is Xiomara Cisneros, and I am a manager with the Housing Affordability Team at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, CZI, and I'm a proud board member of the Housing Leadership Council. And I want to share my appreciation for all of you, the attendees, our sponsors, and housing supporters that made Affordable Housing Month and this event possible. Now more than ever, we must respond to the housing shortage and make San Mateo County a more equitable and affordable place for everyone. If you haven't already become a member of HLC, please consider becoming one and give for those who can't. It is now my pleasure to introduce Tackling the Challenge of Producing Deeply Affordable Housing, hosted by Housing Choices. Our moderator will be Kalisha Webster, and if you have any questions or any issues with your Zoom, please drop them in the chat or raise your hand, and an HLC staff person will be with you shortly. And without much further ado, let's go ahead and begin the event.
Thank you. My name is Kalisha Webster, and thank you all for joining us here this evening in conversation around tackling the challenge of producing deeply affordable housing. My name is Kalisha Webster, Senior Housing Advocate at Housing Choices. We welcome everyone to introduce yourselves in the chat box, your name, pronouns, organization, and what affordable housing means to you. Some quick housekeeping. The first half of our workshop will be panelist presentations, and then we'll be opening up discussion for Q&A at the end of the workshop. We'll be monitoring the chat box throughout, so please feel free to add your questions for panelists at any time. So Housing Choices was founded 25 years ago by parents and service providers of people with developmental and other disabilities to advocate for more inclusive community housing. In addition to our housing advocacy work, we also provide direct client services to regional center consumers with developmental and other disabilities and their families to find and retain affordable housing. From our work, we see firsthand how difficult it can be for low-income families and individuals to find safe, stable, and affordable housing in one of the most unaffordable regions in the country. As the housing element update process has been in full swing locally, we've been working with cities and counties to find solutions to housing our most vulnerable members of the community, those earning less than 30% of area median income. We were also excited to see the state pass AB 1043, recognizing a new acutely low-income.
Oh, I thought that's for speaking.
Thanks, guys. Acutely low-income for people earning less than 15% of area median income, which many of our severely disabled clients fall under. Sorry, if you're not speaking, would you mind muting yourselves, please? Thanks, guys. Getting some background noise from the audience. But knowing how challenging it has been to meet the needs of extremely low-income households, we wondered what AB 1043 really means for the future of affordable housing in our state and region. The goals of today's workshop are to first examine how current state and county affordable housing financing programs incentivize the development of extremely low-income housing. Second, despite these programs, extremely low-income housing continues to be the most challenging affordability level for developers to include in new projects, a problem which in our high-cost region has led to one of the worst homelessness crises in the country. If we are to aspire to safely and stably house every member of our community, we must think critically about the challenges that developers continue to face in creating deeply affordable housing when utilizing current financing programs. And lastly, we must recognize that the issue of housing affordability is one of economic justice. There is no one solution to solving this crisis, and if we are to create meaningful change, we must look at the many different systems at work and discuss how we can tackle the issue from all fronts, including local, regional, and state policies and programs. We have four wonderful panelists joining us today for this conversation. Mark Stivers, Director of Legislative and Regulatory Advocacy at California Housing Partnership, will walk us through how state programs address the need for extremely low-income housing, as well as pending policy initiatives aimed at increasing production of ELI housing. Next, we'll hear from Rose Cade, Deputy Director of San Mateo County Department of Housing, who'll discuss the county's strategies for increasing production of ELI housing. Then Robin Zimbler, founder of FREEBIRD Development Company, will present a case study of one of our team's affordable housing developments, which included ELI housing and the challenges they face in financing the project. And last but not least, We'll hear from Gail Gilliman, Chief Strategy Officer at All Home, about some of the different strategies All Home and the Regional Impact Council are advocating for to address the housing and homelessness crisis in the Bay Area and throughout the state. Before we hear from our panelists, I want to talk a little bit more about the individual lives that we have the opportunity to drastically improve if we were to meet the needs of creating housing at the deepest levels of affordability. In December 2021, the Turner Center released a startling report, On the Edge of Homelessness, the Vulnerability of Extremely Low-Income Households in the Bay Area, in which they determined that in 2019, the average ELI household in the Bay Area earned less than $18,000 per year, or less than 15% of the region's area median income. Since 2019, the annual median income for the region has continued to grow, with San Mateo County's for 2022 released just last month by HUD, now at $130,500 for a single person. This translates to anyone earning less than $39,150 per year, qualifying as extremely low income. In the report, the Turner Center also found that in 2019, over 102,000 people in ELI households in San Mateo, there are over 102,000 people living in ELI households in San Mateo County. As the county's area median income has increased 16% over the last 3 years, and wages for those in the lowest income brackets have not kept pace, we can assume that even more of the people living in our community are now considered to be extremely low income. They also found that of the individuals within these households, nearly 50% were under the age of 18 or over the age of 65, and 15% have a disability. And while Black or African American individuals made up only 2.1% of the total San Mateo County population, in 2019, they made up 3.3% of ELI individuals in the county. For Hispanic and Latinx individuals, who made up only 24.4% of the county's total population, they were even more overrepresented, making up 45.4% of ELI households in the county. And most concerning of all, in furthering the urgency for production of more ELI housing, in 2019, in San Mateo County, 70% of ELI renter households were severely cost burdened, paying more than 50% of their household income towards rent and only one emergency or global pandemic away from homelessness. And for those already unhoused in 2021, the county found that 96% of the 2,200 households they supported in homeless outreach and shelter clients were extremely low income. Beyond the need for ELI housing, the Turner Center report brought to light a less talked about issue, one that Housing Choices has been struggling with for years, as many of our severely disabled clients are priced out of even the most affordable housing in our region. How do we house the ELI neighbors who do not meet the minimum income requirements to qualify for ELI rents? The chart before you shows how maximum supplemental security income payments compared to maximum ELI one-bedroom rents in 2020 in every county in the state. As you can clearly see, San Mateo County ranked least affordable for seniors and other adults unable to work due to a disability who receive SSI. And they're not the only ones priced out of affordable housing due to the high income inequality in our region. As was previously stated, the average ELI household in 2019 earned less than 15% of the area median income in our region. Last year, we had all hoped the federal government would step in to help tackle our housing and homelessness crisis with the passage of Build Back Better. Unfortunately, our federal legislators dropped the ball, and so now more than ever, we must look to our state, regional, and local leaders to find other solutions for meeting the moment. With that, I'd like to welcome our first panelist, Mark Stivers, to talk about the state's current strategies.
Great, thank you, Kalisha. So again, my task here is to give a little bit of a report on where we are today. What is the state doing to encourage and even require ELI housing in affordable housing? And Kalisha, if you want to bring up some of those slides, we can jump right into that. And just while she's doing that, I will note that for purposes of this discussion, I actually used to administer a number of these programs. So if you have any questions, we can get right into that. Go ahead and skip to the next slide, please, Kalisha. So I think most of you know, almost all affordable rental housing has developed a low-income housing tax credits. It's the basic building block on which we fund everything. There are two types. There are 9% federal tax credits and 4% credits. We won't spend a lot of time on the details, but there's two paths to get to housing developed. Within the 9% program, the way that the Tax Credit Allocation Committee administers the program, effectively the point scoring system requires that all applicants make at least 10% of the units available to families at 30% of area median income or extremely low income families. They do not require people to go below that. And I know we were just talking about that 15% is what many people can afford, but we do get at least 10% of the units at 30% AMI. And I would say in addition to that, TCAC has sets aside 10% of the tax credits in any round for kind of homeless projects and another 4% for special needs projects. And while those developments don't have to have deeper targeting than this, most of them do, because it is very difficult to do supportive housing and homeless housing without having lower rents. People just can't afford the units. And they often come with housing choice vouchers that sometimes are available. So go ahead and skip to the next slide. So then in the 4% tax credit program, essentially it is the California Debt Limit Allocation Committee that sort of oversees that side of it for the most part. And they too have a point scoring system that effectively requires all applicants to make at least 10% of the units affordable at 30% of AMI. But beyond that, they are working on a new tiebreaker that will take effect in around July. And in that new tiebreaker, which basically decides who gets funding, it affects almost all awards. The biggest single factor in that tiebreaker would be a rent savings benefit, where we look at what is the difference between the fair market rate, or essentially a market rent in that community, and the amount that the developer is going to charge in that unit. And so if you have a unit that's available to someone at 30% AMI, that will be a very big differential, particularly in places like San Mateo County, where the fair market rents are very high to begin with. And that will be essentially what that tiebreaker will do is it will incentivize applicants to have a fairly large portion of 30% AMI units to bring their average affordability down to 40%. Kind of the benefits sort of cut off at 40%, but it will even further incentivize developments to have project-based rental assistance, like the housing choice vouchers I just mentioned. So the whole system is going to drive people down to having the lowest rents possible that they can support. Go ahead and switch to the next slide. The Department of Housing has also combined a bunch of its programs recently into something called the Super NOFA, and this affects the multifamily housing program, the veterans program, the farm worker program, the infrastructure infill grant program. And they too have a system very similar to SIDLAC's. The point scoring system requires at least 10% of the units to be available at 30% AMI. They have a tiebreaker that has 3 different components. It's not the same as SIDLAC's, but one of the components is essentially the same. They will incentivize folks to bring developments with the lowest average affordability will do much better. There's sort of a limit to that at 40 when the average gets to 40% of AMI. But units with rental assistance are counted at 30% even after that. And so again, the incentives are to bring your rents down as low as possible, to have as many 30% units as you can possibly do. And beyond that, to have rental assistance that bring rents down even more for extremely low income residents. Go ahead and skip to the next slide, please. So that's sort of where we are today in the state housing programs. So there's pretty much an alignment across the various state housing agencies. In terms of what's happening at the legislature, I know one of our other panelists is going to talk about AB 2094, but there's also a bill by Assemblyman Manshine, AB 2453, that is trying to create incentives within HCD's multifamily housing program for essentially ELI units that have service-aligned housing, meaning there are programs that already support services for low-income people, such as the PACE program, the program for all-inclusive care for the elderly. There are a number of programs that can provide services, and we're trying to create incentives for developers to create units that are aligned with those services, that basically bring those service dollars to their residents. And in terms of those incentives, it would be higher loan limits. Developers could get more money from HCD. They would, because those services already are pretty well known, they wouldn't have to have a separate service plan. They would be able to spend more on services than HCD otherwise requires. And they would be able to use alternative care sites as an eligible cost. So things that weren't necessarily on site, but they were a little bit off site, they could count those in the project cost. So those are some of the things that we're looking to do. I think we all agree that, we're not serving the need. We need to do more. At the end of the day, we are also trying to work for additional resources to support affordable housing at all levels. But because most of these programs have significant units at 30% MI, bringing more funding in for the programs generally will result in ELI units. Thanks, Kalisha.
Thanks, Mark. And next we'll be hearing from Rose Cade, Deputy Director at DOH, who will be talking about what the county is doing in order to incentivize more ELI housing production.
Thanks, Felicia. Good evening. I'm Rose Cade. I'm the Deputy Director for the San Mateo County Department of Housing. Our slides, there they are. Can you go to the second slide, Felicia, please? I just wanted to talk a little bit about the structure of the department. The Department of Housing includes both the county's Housing and Community Development Division, as well as the Housing Authority of San Mateo County, which is fairly unusual that the county housing agency and the housing authority are housed under one roof, and it really provides us with a lot of opportunity to collaborate between the two. Could you go to the third slide, please, Kalisha? Okay, well, I'll just keep going. The primary tool that the county has to finance affordable housing is the Affordable Housing Fund. The Affordable Housing Fund, we have done 9 rounds to date. The source of funding, the main source of funding for the Affordable Housing Fund has been from Measure A, which was then extended with a second vote to Measure K. It's a countywide half-cent sales tax. To date, the county has invested, since launching the Affordable Housing Fund in, I believe, 2013, the county has invested $172 million in local county funds through our Affordable Housing Fund. In addition to those county funds, to the extent possible, we have been aggressive in trying to leverage combine county funding with state funding. And so we've applied for and received funding from the Housing for Healthy California, Mental Health Services Act funding, No Place Like Home, the Local Housing Trust Fund, and Permanent Local Housing Allocation. In particular, those first 3, the Housing for Healthy California, the Mental Health Services Act funding, and No Place Like Home, they all target special needs populations, most of whom are extremely low income and even acutely income. Now, the fourth slide. The use of the Affordable Housing Fund and building permanent affordable housing includes new construction of multifamily rental housing, rehabilitation of multifamily rentals, new construction of home ownership. The funding can be used to acquire sites for pre-development costs, for construction, and most importantly, to help finance a 15-year capitalized operating services reserve, which helps to support the operating costs and additional supportive services for supportive housing projects. And this is one of the ways in which the county, by making that an eligible use of funds, is really helping to make those projects more doable for our development partners. I'm moving to slide number 5 now. So we have much like what Mark was talking about with the state programs, we have a number of incentives to incentivize developers to address the housing needs of the ELI households. We do require 15% of the units that receive funding from the county to be set aside for households at or below 30% of AMI. Yeah, I saw that, Diane, that my slides are not, it's still just the, it's not the slideshow, it's just the first slide. So I apologize for that. It looks like there's maybe a technical difficulty. And we also require that a minimum of 5%, in addition to the 15 ELI units, 5% are set aside for homeless and county clients. We also provide additional incentives and scoring advantages if a developer will set aside a higher percentage of units at 35 AMI below, more units for homeless at risk of homelessness and county clients, for frail, elderly, and households that include persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Half of the AHF funds are prioritized for projects that designate at least 20% of the total units to homeless households. So we really set aside half of that, our funding, to incentivize our developers to go above and beyond those minimum requirements that I talked about earlier. Go to slide 6, please. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what that means in terms of production. Since we launched the Affordable Housing Fund, we have provided financing for over 3,000 units. And of those, 743 are ELI units, about 25% of the total, and almost 300 or 10% are set aside for homeless. In addition to our Affordable Housing Fund, we had a program called the Affordable Rental Acquisition and Preservation Program, which provided financing for acquisition of naturally occurring affordable housing, or NOAA housing. And I believe we made about 6 loans under that pilot program, including a project called Mosaic Gardens, and 21 out of 55 units are set aside for ELL households with supportive services. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit about the Housing Authority's rental assistance programs. We have Section 8 housing choice vouchers, which includes the portable vouchers, tenant-based Section 8 vouchers, project-based Section 8 vouchers, and RAD, rental assistance demonstration project. We have annually had an RFP for project-basing Section 8 vouchers. Unfortunately, because of our current utilization rate, we haven't done an RFP for project-based vouchers for a couple of years, and it will be a few more years before we will have sufficient space to do another RFP for that. We do have a number of special purpose vouchers, and we work really hard to continuously apply for additional special purpose vouchers, including BASH vouchers, family unification program vouchers, mainstream vouchers, emergency housing vouchers, which came out of the ARPA. The county received 221 to provide rental assistance to homeless households. And we have allocated 100%, actually more than 100% of those vouchers, and are working with Housing Locator Services and the CORES to help those homeless households that have those emergency housing vouchers to locate housing. And then we have a pool of permanent supportive housing vouchers. Next slide, please. So 75% of our vouchers are targeted to extremely low-income households, and we require in those RFPs, depending on the number of vouchers a household a developer gets, increasing. The more vouchers you get, the more we expect you to serve extremely low-income and homeless and disabled households. Next slide. This is the last slide. I have a few more, but I just wanted to make sure that I talked about, so we have in our administrative plan a goal of 75% of our vouchers be set aside for ELI households. But when we did an analysis of actually what our numbers are, you can see in this slide number 9 that the tenant-based vouchers, 85% are serving ELI households. The project-based vouchers, 93%. The VASH vouchers, 82%. vouchers 87, mainstream almost 100%. The RAD program, which is we have you'll see just 29 units, and that's an actual physical property. And so we don't evict people when their incomes go up, which is why that number is a little bit lower. The emergency housing vouchers, 96%, and the permanent supportive housing vouchers are 98%. So you'll see that with our voucher program, a total, of 88% of the people who receive vouchers in San Mateo County have incomes at or below 30% AMI. And I know I'm kind of at time, so I'll just let people ask questions.
Hi, guys. I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties on my part, but we will definitely be sharing these slides with everyone. And sorry again to Rose as well. But I just wanted to call our next speaker, Robin, and I will work on make sure that the slides come up. Sorry about that, guys.
Okay, if they don't, I can always share my screen too. And I'll apologize now. I've had a couple notices that my internet's unstable, so hopefully that doesn't affect this presentation at all. But if it does, I'll be back. Are you able to share my slides?
I'm working on it, sorry.
Okay, well, so while you do that, let me introduce myself. My name is Robin Zimbler. I am the founder of FREEBIRD Development Company. I have been in the industry working for large developers for and actually governments for about 20 years, but I started FREEBIRD, an emerging developer, about 3 or 4 years ago now. If you could, are you able to go back to my first slide? There we go. Second slide. Sorry. So, we currently have projects under construction and in the pipeline in Santa Clara, Sonoma, and San Mateo counties. And those are IDD projects. And then I also have a homeless project in Sonoma County as well that's in my pipeline. So I am a strong supporter of ELI, and I think that'll be evident as I make my presentation. But I do think that there should be more policies encouraging ELI within a more mixed income setting. I think that would accomplish 3 things. It would make public subsidies stretch further. It would support a continuum of household incomes that are, in the middle of this housing crisis right now. And then I also believe that, having the ELI units within more mixed income settings lead for better outcomes for residents. So I was tasked with presenting a case study in terms of the challenges I faced in financing a project with 25% at 30% of ELI. So this project was FREEBIRD's first new construction project. So very excited that we finally started construction on this one after 1.5 years, 2-year delay, which we'll talk about in a second. It's MONROE Street Apartments, and it's in Santa Clara City and Santa Clara County. If you can go to the next slide. So it's 65 units. There's a 25% set aside for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and that's at 30% of AMI, so 25% at ELI units. As I mentioned, this is in the city of Santa Clara. It was awarded through a competitive RFP process in 2018. Unfortunately, it was transportation right of way, so we couldn't take advantage of any of the state's streamlining programs, and had a fairly long year plus entitlement process, do a full CEQA, all that jazz. We got it entitled in 2020, which unfortunately coincided with when bonds became competitive. So we had to go 4 rounds to get bonds and credits. We continually tried to make the project align with the competitive scoring for those programs. And we finally got our bonds and credits awarded in December of 2021, and we closed our financing and started construction in early April. So if you can just stay on the slide for a second. So what I wanted to point out here was that, so in our original proposal to the city was looking for, they in their RFP process actually cared most about kind of the missing middle. That's what they wanted to serve with the site, not necessarily ELI. I have adult nephew with developmental disabilities. So when I started FREEBIRD, that was a population that I always wanted to serve. So I presented kind of a mixed income model, 25% for IDD, going up to 80% of AMI. That kind of fit very nicely with what the city was trying to accomplish. We had an income average of 58.75%. And when you factor in our final closing costs in April of 2022, to serve that income structure, which had 25% ELI, but also went up to 80% of AMI, we would have needed about 9.7 million in public subsidy. So we originally had a city funding commitment, and then we also had a county funding commitment. But once the CDLAC and the bonds became competitive, and so much money was put towards the ELI, VLI set aside, we had to restructure our income mix to be competitive, which took a year and a half to do. And that income mix had to generate an average affordability of 50% of AMI, again, to be competitive. So you'll see what that did to our income tiers. It didn't impact our 30% AMI tier. So we still had the 25%. We didn't actually end up having more at 30% of AMI, but we had to lower some of the other AMIs to get down to the overall average affordability. And as a result, we needed $4.5 more million in public subsidy to do that. We had to go back. Actually, if you can go to the next slide. So again, the challenges were bonds became competitive, deeper and deeper targeting meant that we had to go back to get additional city funding. We had to get project-based Section 8, which could not be targeted to the ELI units because our set aside was IDD, and Santa Clara doesn't allow for targeting of vouchers to IDD. And then we also had to go back and get CalHFA MIP funding. So it was basically a year and a half, 2 years of just trying to get more funding to be able to get to this 50% AMI, which just causes delays to the project, increased construction costs, increased interest rates, led to additional financing gaps. So it just kind of became this, snowballing effect of what this average affordability kind of requirement to be competitive caused for the project. Just as an anecdote, our next project is very similarly sized to that project. It's in Santa Rosa. It's in 62 units, similar bedroom mix. And that one we applied for MHP funding for. It is a 50% homeless project. So 50% of our units are actually at 15%. And 20% of AMI, so even lower than 30% of AMI. But the other 50% we had to make, very close to ELI as well, just to be competitive under the MHP program, which at that time you needed 30% average AMI to be competitive. And so that project already has $25 million in public funding, again, just to reach the 30% AMI average affordability. Nothing saying, without that, we could have had some higher income units, like up to 60% in that project, and not required so much public subsidy and so much time. So if you go to the next slide, which is my last slide. So my big picture recommendations would be, well, number one, again, on Monroe Street, we have this interesting thing where the Santa Clara County doesn't allow you to target PBVs to IDD. So one recommendation would just be for housing authorities to follow San Mateo and Santa Cruz lead, which do allow PBVs preference for people with disabilities who require specialized on-site services. And then secondly, I know that I don't have a lot of people who probably agree with the next statement, but I would love for the state to implement their programmatic priorities through the 9% program, and the vast majority of HCD programs that do target special needs populations while keeping the bond and the 4% program and the MHP far more flexible. I actually think like the 10% at 30% of AMI isn't enough. I think you could increase that requirement to 20 to 25% to make sure you're getting ELI units, but I would do away with these incentives for 40% AMI average affordability, because I don't think at the end of the day you're getting I think you could get the same amount of ELI units with some cross subsidy, saving those public resources for other programs, other housing programs, non-tax credit housing programs even, and also, again, serving a continuum of incomes that better serve the residents. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. And last, we have Gail Gilman joining us to talk about All Home and some of the local and regional, as well as state programs and policies that they're advocating for.
Thank you so much, Kalisha. And I apologize if I have a lot of background noise. I unfortunately am in a noisy place. So I'm so happy to be here. My name's Gail Gilman. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at All Home. And I'm gonna see if I can do this. Let's see, and share my screen. Great, can everyone see that? Okay. So All Home is a Bay Area organization that advances regional solutions to disrupt the cycle of poverty and homelessness and redress the disparities and outcomes as a result of race. I want to be really clear. All Home firmly believes that the leading cause of homelessness nationwide and in the Bay Area is due to systemic racism and policies that have been put in place over the decades. But we also care about extremely low income individuals. There's over 1 million people in the Bay Area who are extremely low income, and we're very concerned that they're at the tipping point and the precipice of falling into homelessness. We work across regions, sectors by breaking down silos. We convene, we grant make. We work on legislation in Sacramento. We advise the governor's office on Project Home Key and Room Key. And our founder and CEO, Tamika Moss, sits on the Interagency Council of Homelessness. So in co-creating our solutions, we brought together our Regional Impact Council, which Kalisha mentioned in our introduction. It's a roundtable of stakeholders from the 9 Bay Area counties, both Ray Hodge, who I know is observing, and Rose Cade from the County of San Mateo serve on our technical committee. And we have a steering committee made up of elected officials, including members of the County Board of Supervisors from San Mateo, the 3 big city mayors, business leaders, the Bay Area Council. And so we came together and we issued a platform for change. Our first bold recommendation, which we are working closely with San Mateo County to achieve this goal, is to have a 75% reduction in unsheltered homelessness for the Bay Area by the end of 2024. So to do this bold move, we sort of have come up with a approach to it. We need to be investing in interim housing. We learned during the pandemic that when homeless individuals can quickly be moved into non-congregate shelter and have that door they can close and that lock they can turn, they can really get the respite they need from the trauma of being homeless, and many times actually come up with their own solutions to end their homeless crisis. We need to be investing in permanent housing solutions. But the biggest thing we need to be investing in, and I want to say San Mateo County is a leader in this, along with their partnership with CZI, is really preventing individuals from becoming homeless and quickly housing them once they do. And that's really looking at prevention and targeting our prevention dollars to those ELI households most at risk of becoming homeless if they have a housing insecurity event. So these numbers are from 2019. I know the 2022 count numbers are being released as we speak by San Mateo County. I did not have time to update this slide, but based on the close to 1,000 individuals that were experiencing homelessness in 2019, we sort of broke down the interventions you would need in the categories of prevention, interim shelter, and housing. So you see here, we would need about 1,500 prevention interventions year over year to get to a point where we stop the inflow into homelessness. And we would need to bring indoors a little over the 3-year period. We need to bring indoors a little over 1,000 people over that period of time. We really think this is a way to get to a place of functional zero for San Mateo County. I will say this was a illustrative model. And you see how you don't need any new interventions after 2024. San Mateo County was the most successful county in the Bay Area on their home key applications, and really want to commend Rose and Ray for that, and Mike Key, your county administrator, for really putting forth the plan to really end unsheltered homelessness in San Mateo County. With the home key applications and those awards, All Home is working with county staff to validate San Mateo County might be a functional 0 by 2025, meaning they'll have a shelter bed for anyone experiencing homelessness in the county. So we see here again the demographic breakdown. This is 2019 numbers. We see that African Americans and Pacific Islanders and Latinx individuals are overrepresented in the homeless population. This is true in the Bay, and it's true in San Mateo County. And as the Turner report said, there's close to 32,000 ELI renters in the county. So what works to really help those who may not be experiencing homelessness, but who are extremely low income and at risk? Well, we know what works. We know direct cash payments work. There have been pilots around the country, in California and in the Bay Area, that UBI, Universal Basic Income, works. We know with as little as $400 extra a month, a ELI household makes the choices they need for them and for their families to maintain their housing and to stabilize their family. We know that tax credits also work. That expansion of the low-income housing, low-income child tax credit program, we could look at, and we know it's being talked about in Sacramento, a tax credit for low-income renters. But these sort of tax credits, direct cash payments, or refunds to these families work. We also really want to urge counties and County of San Mateo to look at a shallow rent subsidy program. So if you are two seniors living on Social Security, you can't afford affordable housing. You can't afford to move into a 30% AMI unit because you're at 20 to 15% of AMI. For as little as $400 a month, you can write that rent down. You could subsidize that unit so it would be affordable for those seniors to move in, or for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities who are receiving Social Security to move into a unit and live in and thrive. This is far less than a project-based Section 8 voucher. This is just closing the gap between 30% of AMI rents and 15% of AMI rents. And we know that the biggest factor we need is we need economic security for all the households in San Mateo County, those 44,000 that are extremely low income. We need wage growth to equal housing costs, and we need job growth to equal housing production. And we really hope that these are things that San Mateo County, we know, is exploring many of these and working towards them. We also think that AB 2094, a bill sponsored by All Home, can help. This will require that communities across the state have to report to the state on their production of ELI housing in particular. We think the incentives at CIDLAC and at TCAC help with that. But what we do know is that it's very hard for the developers to build at 30% and below, because they normally need an operating subsidy to help the building operate because the rents are just not affordable. And just like we have local subsidy programs for the production of housing for those experiencing homelessness, we really need those for folks who are not yet homeless, but who themselves are extremely low income. And now I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Gail, and thank you to all of our panelists. I just wanted to open it up now to Q&A. See, we've gotten a couple questions so far in the chat, but please feel free to continue adding questions for our panelists. So to start off, I'll ask one question, really pertinent to right now. Cities and counties are in the final stages of recommending policies and programs in their housing elements. And here in San Mateo County, several of them are looking for strategies to incentivize the production of deeply affordable housing for their extremely low-income residents. What policies and programs within the actual span of the control of cities would you recommend they incorporate in their housing element in order to make it more financially feasible to develop ELI housing? And second, how can community advocates assure our local leadership are tapping resources for ELI housing? Any takers?
I'll jump in quickly. I mean, I think, you know, again, because of the subsidy that's required to do ELI housing, and even maybe needing to capitalize operating reserves on top of that, it really is a function of the local government having additional resources at its disposal, wherever they come from, wherever they raise them. And then also, to the extent that the county's housing authorities have vouchers available that they can project base, that is probably the most valuable resource at all that really does make housing affordable to ELI households. So wherever the cities and the counties can kind of coordinate their efforts and dedicate project-based vouchers, we can make a lot of progress.
Thanks, Mark. Any other thoughts from the rest of our panelists?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I would echo what Mark said 100%. I think, you know, a lot of it, when you look at ELI, comes down to dollars and cents. I think, you know, I think affordable housing developers, you know, obviously have a desire to include ELI units. It's just a matter of whether the numbers can work with the ELI units. There's not a lack of will on our part, for sure. I think when you look at the market rate developers, I don't think, quite frankly, you know, I'm not a market rate developer, although I have worked for developers doing market rate projects before. I think there's just going to be market rate developers are going to do whatever they can to not include ELI units. I don't want to speak for the whole population, because that's a broad statement, but, you know, in my conversations with market rate developers, that's just not a population that they're going to try to serve, even with incentives, unless they are required to serve.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that's definitely a struggle that we see when we're looking for ELI. We're mostly talking to affordable housing developers. It's very rare that we get a market rate developer wanting to build those kind of units.
I wanted to mention the state's new pro-housing designation, which, you know, is asking local jurisdictions to really do kind of what you were asking about, Kalisha, is to really think about, like, what are the policies that will help to remove barriers and incentivize affordable housing. And so the county has just gone through a process and submitted an application for a pro-housing designation. And our hope is that that we get it and that we are actually able to implement some of the policies that we spelled out in that application. And then we'd like to you know, help support in the provision of technical assistance to the 20 cities that are located within the county, because you know, the unincorporated county is only a small percentage of where affordable housing is built in San Mateo County, and most of the larger share of the housing is not built in the unincorporated county. And so, you know, we'd like to work with our local jurisdictions to help them think through some of the policies that would allow them to get the designation, the pro-housing designation, which all of which are really, like, I think the state has done a pretty good job of creating a fairly aggressive envelope of, you know, what that means to be a pro-housing local jurisdiction. So I think that's one of the policy pieces that is is new and will be a tool for getting to some of the, you know, local jurisdictions thinking about what they can do to remove barriers and to provide resources to provide more ELI housing.
That's fantastic to hear, Rose. And, you know, I can speak for other housing advocates. We would definitely love to see how we can support cities with adopting more pro-housing legislation as well. So that's awesome. I'm glad to hear the county is working on that. Any thoughts, Scale?
I mean, I do think, you know, and it's hard because this is an ongoing commitment, but I do think more and more communities need to look at either through sales tax revenue or business tax revenue, you know, and like San Francisco did, they passed a gross receipts tax on business and actually had support of major business leaders like Mark Benioff and Salesforce, Proposition C, to create a local subsidy program for folks that are not experiencing homelessness. I think there's this big myth. There's 1 million people in the Bay, at least as of 2019, that are extremely low income. Less than 8% are experiencing homelessness. So everyone else is living somewhere. The bulk of them, 47% are working, another close to 40% are seniors. So they really are folks that are seniors who retired without having that pension or without having that hefty 401k to keep them afloat. And they're the folks who fixed my shoes and served my coffee at Starbucks today. And so they're really the backbone of our economy. And I think we should look at a shallow rent subsidy program to help subsidize and ride down affordable housing. All Home would love to see 100% ELI properties with a subsidy attached to them, the way we see 100% supportive.
Thanks, Gail, for sharing that. That's something that Housing Choices has also advocated for, is shallow rent subsidies. We know that, it's surprising how little it will actually take to help keep people stably housed. So we definitely strongly support that. And so next question, I think, is maybe for Robin. Can you say more about how the percentages, 4% versus 9%, affects how long it takes to build affordable housing?
It's a good question. I think, there's pre-2020 and there's post-2020. So pre-2020, 9% credits were competitive and 4% were over the counter. So you could generally get a 4% deal done much quicker than a 9% deal. In 2020, 4% credits became competitive, and it's hard to, the way the state programs are, it's hard to have an plan A, plan B right now for 4%.
Oh, Robin, you muted for some reason.
It's almost like you have to pick a path, and because, can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. And because the 4% credits are now super competitive as well, I can't say there's any real difference between the time it takes to get a 9% and a 4% done. Sorry, I didn't mean to be giving you side eye. I have
no, you're good.
I have multiple screens.
I was actually going to ask Mark if you have any thoughts on that as well. I know you used to oversee these programs.
Yeah, I don't think the type of credit you're doing has much variance on the timing it takes to develop anymore.
Got it. All right, and we have another question, maybe for Mark. Jolene, I don't know if you want to maybe unmute and clarify. She asked, can you cover what the specific incentives are for developers in the recent bill? Which bill are we?
Yeah, I think they're referring to AB 2483 that I mentioned.
Yeah, that is the one.
Okay.
I'm going to put in here the specific language from the bill, and I don't know if others want to take it on. It's one I've not worked on super amount, but so the loan limits are just higher. It doesn't say how much, but HD would get to determine that, but they would have probably at least a $25,000 increase in the loan limits per unit. Again, the HD requires very extensive service plans, but again, if you're aligned with these already existing services that are kind of well-known programs, you wouldn't have to provide that plan. The department caps how much you can spend on services, and we would lift that cap for these developments. And then the last one, I'm not super clear on myself, but it would allow applicants to use funds made available under MHP to fund alternative care sites for projects aligning with PACE. And I think that means off-site, but maybe someone correct me if I'm wrong.
No, honestly, this is one that I haven't studied too much as well, so I'm not positive on. And so I see we have about 5 minutes left here. So one kind of big picture, pie in the sky kind of question. California has an unprecedented state budget surplus. I think it's like $100 billion. If you had the opportunity to use some of that funding at the state level to increase affordable housing for extremely low income people, what would you prioritize?
Well, I will say that the Affordable Housing Coalitions, both the state and the regional organizations, are really have prioritized two programs. One is the California Housing Accelerator, which we have hundreds of developments that already have funding from the HCD, from local governments, but they can't get the tax credits that they need. So this program sort of replaces tax credits and allows us to start construction on those many developments. So that's number one. And then the state's main rental housing program that, as we talked about, really does incentivize deep targeting and ELI units is the multifamily housing program. And it's been funded with the Proposition 1 bond approved by voters 4 years ago. And we're about to make the last awards under that program. So it's really critical for us that we get some money into MHP. There are lots of other things that are all good that we're all talking about at the legislature, but those are really the top two priorities. And while they're not specific to ELI, you probably can't do ELI housing with those two things, without some of those two things.
Great comments, Mark. I know you're the state legislation guru, so you covered a lot there. But if any of our other panelists, if you guys all have, Rose, go ahead, take it.
Yeah, I just, I in part because the county has had the pleasure of working on the home key hotels. You know, typically we've been a lender, but now we're an owner, and God bless developers. They do it better than we do. That's why we work in collaboration with them. But when you're serving those extremely low income households, we have to have a better rental subsidy program, you know, so the shallow rental subsidy that Gail talked about. I didn't have a chance to talk about the pilot that the county is launching, which is a small scale local rental subsidy program specifically targeted to homeless people. But you know, especially in a county like San Mateo, where we don't have the ability to project-based vouchers because we just don't have the space for that in our voucher program right now. These projects that target those extremely low-income households don't pencil without a rental subsidy. And so that's where I would like to see the governor put some of those resources, because the county would like to incentivize on the development side, the capital side, more and more units. But we know that it's just really challenging for our development partners to make those projects operate without a rental subsidy.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you bring up, Rose. I know a lot of advocates say, you know, we're not going to build ourselves out of this this crisis. And so, yes, rental subsidies is definitely going to be one of the key ways to help people to stay stably housed. For our other panelists, any last thoughts while we wrap up?
I guess I'll just say ditto, a combination of all three. We need the MHP program, we need to incentivize, we need the shallow rent subsidy program. That goes much further in affordable housing developments than it will do in the market. And in the market, what we need is an ELI renters credit. But we should be buying down every single affordable unit. With all due respect, we care about ELI at all home. Missing middle can go somewhere else. We should be writing those rents down and building this housing. There's data on our website from 2019 that shows statewide ELI is the least produced housing units that if it's non-homeless. There's more homeless housing being produced because ELI and homeless people are in the ELI count. So I just wanted to make that distinction. And we really need to be caring about housing security for those folks who are not experiencing homelessness and are extremely low income.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Gail. And any last thoughts, Robin? And our last, looks like we're right at time, but go ahead if you have any last thoughts.
No, just I think all my fellow panelists are spot on. So it's been all good.
Thank you guys. Well, thank everyone for joining us tonight. We really enjoyed having this opportunity to speak with all of you and to start to tackle the issue of creating more deeply affordable housing.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.